How to lower SBP spike amplitude. Number 1493, VPT Sharp 054, January 5, 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category: Stroke. Preface: For more than 15 years, I measured my blood pressure once each morning, always on my right wrist. Like many patients, I relied on averaged SBP values to judge whether my blood pressure was under control. Nearly 99% of the time, those numbers appeared acceptable. In hindsight, that routine created a false sense of safety and nearly cost me my life. On June 21, 2025, around 1100 am, my SBP suddenly rose to 175 millimeters of mercury, and I suffered a stroke. After my stroke, I understood what the averages had hidden. Throughout my 63 years of college-level study in mathematics and multiple science disciplines, I have never been comfortable relying solely on averages or statistical results, because they often lack precision and can conceal important and sometimes dangerous information. I also recognize that this view reflects my personal bias, shaped by my academic training and long career in high technology. My stroke was not caused by a slow rise in baseline blood pressure alone. It began with cerebral microvessel calcification, resulting from 36 years of type 2 diabetes. That long-term damage weakened my vessels and was largely irreversible. The final trigger was an acute SBP spike, occurring on top of those already damaged vessels. The only meaningful control left to me is preventing another sudden and extreme rise in SBP. After my stroke, I changed how I measure my blood pressure. Each day, I measure blood pressure in 4 to 5 rounds, especially when I feel it is necessary, such as after walking exercise or during periods of emotional excitement triggered by annoying or unpleasant situations. In each round, I measure both upper arm and wrist, on both left and right sides. This produces 20 datasets per day. Each dataset contains 6 values: SBP, DBP, heart rate, pulse pressure, mean arterial pressure, and SBP spike amplitude, resulting in 120 blood pressure data points per day. Over the past 5 months, I have accumulated 156 days of data, totaling 18,720 measurements. Every physician, neurologist, and nurse practitioner I have spoken with has been surprised by this volume of self-collected data, and often asks why I measure so much. My answer is simple: this is the only way. I know how to detect acute hypertension before it becomes deadly. Blood pressure behaves very differently from other health variables. Glucose changes over minutes. Body weight changes over hours. Blood pressure, however, can change within seconds or minutes. A single emotional surge, anger, cognitive overload, urgency, pain, or sudden shock can drive SBP sharply upward, without meaningfully changing the daily average. That is exactly why averaged SBP failed to protect me. This experience forced me to shift my focus from baseline SBP to SBP spike amplitude. I no longer view blood pressure as a stable number. I now see it as a fast and unstable signal, with dangerous peaks that can rupture my fragile vessels. Preventing those peaks has become my primary survival goal. Blood pressure medications are helpful for lowering baseline SBP, but they do not guarantee protection against acute SBP spikes. Medications act slowly and cannot fully suppress sudden nervous system surges triggered by emotion or stress. My own stroke occurred despite years of medical care. This is not a criticism of medication, but a recognition of its limits. Acute SBP spikes are driven largely by neural activation rather than vascular tone alone, and they require immediate behavioral and physiological damping instead of delayed chemical control. In other words, this requires deep understanding of physical dynamics, not just reliance on chemical compounds. This realization forced me to rethink blood pressure control through the combined lenses of time, space, frequency, and dynamics. Acute SBP spikes are fast, neural-driven, and reactive events that occur on a time scale, where chemical intervention cannot reliably respond. Medications may lower baseline pressure, but they cannot guarantee protection against sudden neural surges. This is a matter of time constants, not ideology. Because of this, I am now focused on learning how to calm my body in real time when excitation begins to build. This includes deep breathing with extended exhalation, posture stabilization, slowing speech, and avoiding emotional escalation during vulnerable moments. These actions are not philosophical choices. They are practical survival tools, aimed at reducing SBP spike amplitude immediately. This paper, number 1493, is written out of necessity. It is not an academic exercise or a theoretical discussion. It is a survival-driven investigation into why acute SBP spikes occur, why averaged SBP can be misleading, and how real-time self-monitoring, combined with immediate calming strategies, may reduce the risk of another catastrophic event. My vascular damage from diabetes is already written into history and cannot be altered. Avoiding another acute SBP surge is the only remaining control I have, and this work reflects that reality. Introduction. This paper focuses on one specific but critically important blood pressure phenomenon, systolic blood pressure, SBP, spike amplitude, defined as the difference between maximum SBP and average SBP. SBP spike equals max SBP minus average SBP. Using my longitudinal blood pressure dataset between August 1, 2025 to January 4, 2026 together with VMT energy analysis, I demonstrate that SBP spike amplitude is not only measurable and quantifiable, but also the most practical and dominant modifiable trigger for hemorrhagic stroke in individuals. With my overall cerebral microvascular calcification and stiffness resulted from my 36 years long-term diabetes conditions. Average SBP reflects long-term baseline vascular load, whereas SBP spike amplitude reflects transient failure of vascular control. These two metrics behave very differently in both physiology and mechanics. Treating them as equivalent risks obscures the true rupture mechanism in fragile cerebral microvessels. Pathophysiological meaning of SBP spike amplitude. Average SBP represents sustained pressure applied to the vascular system over long periods of time. It reflects chronic stress, vascular remodeling, and cumulative endothelial burden. In contrast, SBP spike amplitude represents acute mechanical shock, produced when sudden sympathetic activation meets stiff, poorly compliant arteries that are unable to buffer rapid pressure changes. Barariflex is the body's automatic blood pressure brake. When pressure rises suddenly, sensors tell the brain to slow the heart and relax blood vessels. But in stiff or aging vessels this reaction is delayed. During that delay, the pressure wave becomes stronger and is pushed back toward the brain, moving faster than the vessels can adjust. Average SBP is like a steady weight, while an SBP spike is a sudden hit. And it is the sudden hit, not the steady weight, that ruptures weakened brain vessels. From a mechanical perspective, stiff vessels behave like brittle materials. Gradual loading can often be tolerated, but sudden loading causes failure. SBP spikes generate high strain rate rather than high strain magnitude. This distinction is fundamental in both solid and fluid dynamic plasticity, and explains why SBP spike amplitude is a higher order stressor than average SBP in VMT energy analysis. VMT interpretation of SBP spike dominance. In the presented VMT diagrams, cumulative energy contribution is dominated by SBP spike amplitude when normalized at a physiologically meaningful threshold, even when average SBP and pulse pressure remain relatively stable. Spike-related strain accumulates rapidly over time because of its high strain rate nature. From a VMT perspective, average SBP raises the river level slowly, while SBP spikes create flash floods. Fragile bridges do not collapse because the river rises gradually, but because sudden torrents strike them before redistribution or reinforcement is possible. Preventing these flash floods is therefore the correct prevention strategy. Physiological control layers for SBP spike reduction. Sudden blood pressure spikes can be reduced in three main ways. The most important one is calming the nervous system. Most spikes happen because the body suddenly goes into alert mode, not because normal blood pressure has changed. Common triggers include anger, feeling treated unfairly, mental overload, shock-like response, pain, urgent needs, such as needing to urinate, and sudden alarms. These triggers act through the nerves first, not through the blood vessels themselves. My recent stroke occurred when my calcified and stiffened cerebral microvessels were exposed to an acute hypertension spike of 175 millimeters of mercury, triggered by feeling unfairly treated by a real estate agent. The best ways to reduce blood pressure spikes work by calming the nerve surge that causes them. Slow breathing through the nose with a longer breath out, sitting down when pressure starts to rise, speaking more slowly, and avoiding strong emotional triggers all help the body relax and slow the pressure wave. These actions reduce sudden blood pressure spikes without lowering normal blood pressure, which is exactly what we want. Breathing out slowly is especially helpful, because it calms the nervous system, gently slows the heart, and softens the pressure wave before it reaches the brain. It lowers the sudden pressure peak without lowering normal blood pressure. Holding your breath should be avoided, because it briefly increases pressure inside the chest, and can trigger a rebound reaction that pushes blood pressure higher. A simple rule for SBP spike prevention is therefore to avoid breath holding. Ensure exhalation is longer than inhalation. Breathe through the nose when possible, and keep breathing slow and continuous. A 30-second emergency SBP spike suppression protocol. Based on this physiology, a practical 30-second emergency SBP spike suppression protocol can be applied at the moment escalation is detected. The goal is to blunt spike amplitude immediately by suppressing sympathetic surge and reducing pressure wave velocity. In the first few seconds, all activity and speech stop. Posture stabilizes by sitting or leaning back. Both feet are placed flat on the ground, and shoulders and jaw are relaxed. This prevents further sympathetic escalation, and avoids abrupt increases in cardiac output. Over the remaining seconds, 3 slow breaths are performed without breath holding. Each breath consists of inhaling through the nose for about 3 to 4 seconds and exhaling through the nose, or gently through pursed lips for about 6 to 7 seconds. Attention is placed on the exhalation rather than the inhalation. During this period, mental analysis, verbal response, phone interaction, pacing, and exertion are avoided, since all increase SBP spike risk. This brief protocol interrupts neural sympathetic discharge, slows pressure wave transmission in stiff arteries, and reduces strain rate on fragile cerebral vessels. It does not aim to lower average SBP, but to remove the spike, mechanical buffering and temporal behavior control. The second control layer involves mechanical buffering of pressure waves. SBP spikes are amplified when pulse wave reflection is strong. Although vascular calcification cannot be reversed, wave amplification can still be reduced through regular walking, avoidance of sudden isometric strain such as breath, holding or lifting, gentle stretching during activity transitions, and adequate hydration. Blood viscosity contributes to pressure instability during spikes, and hydration improves waveform damping, even when brachial SBP appears unchanged. The third control layer is temporal behavior modification. SBP spikes are not random events. They cluster during early morning sympathetic surges, midday emotional exposure, post-meal, metabolic transitions, and nighttime urgency awakenings. Practical control involves smoothing transitions between activities, avoiding decision-making under time pressure, eliminating confrontational conversations, and minimizing abrupt posture or effort changes. These adjustments reduce both spike frequency and spike height. Normalization threshold and early warning logic. Using from 12 to 15 millimeters of mercury as a normalization threshold for SBP spike amplitude is pathophysiologically sound. Normal buffered systems typically absorb fluctuations under about from 10 to 12 millimeters of mercury. Beyond this range, wave reflection and strain rate increase nonlinearly, aligning with rupture mechanics in stiff vessels. A from 12 to 15 millimeters of mercury threshold therefore functions as an early warning boundary, rather than a late damage marker, which is consistent with preventive medicine logic. This threshold is conservative, rational, and clinically meaningful, particularly in individuals with known vascular stiffness or cerebral calcification. Post-stroke personal reflection. My understanding of SBP spike amplitude did not come from theory alone. It was shaped by my own hemorrhagic stroke, which occurred on top of long-standing vascular stiffness and cerebral calcification, that I already knew were largely irreversible. What surprised me was not my average SBP, which had been relatively controlled, but how a single episode of acute, sympathetic surge produced a pressure spike that exceeded my vessel's tolerance within minutes. That experience clarified something no guideline had emphasized strongly enough for me before. Based on viscoplastic fluid dynamics, it was not the long-term river level that broke the vessel, but the sudden flash flood that arrived without warning. Since my stroke, I have learned that I cannot undo past structural damage, but I can detect, anticipate. Conclusion: this article does not contain many numbers, complex theories, or formal equations and analyses. Instead, it follows a narrative and descriptive approach. Similar to many traditional medical papers, it focuses on simple, practical actions that most people can perform in daily life to help reduce acute SBP spikes. In this way, stroke risk may be reduced to some extent. These suggestions and methods are not intended to replace medications or long-term lifestyle management. Disclaimer: I write this article not for fame, but to share what I have learned, so others can understand complex systems, prevent failure, and live better lives. This content is provided for educational reference only, and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this article freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights belong to the author. Gerald C.